Hello, my name is Alana Patricia, and welcome to the first ever episode of Tell My Story. Today we will be talking about a young girl named Renia Spiegel from Przemsyl, Poland. Some themes discussed in today's episode may be upsetting to some viewers, so please be aware that the subject of the Holocaust will be discussed in today's episode. But more importantly, we will be remembering the beautiful life of a young girl named Renia Spiegel. We will be telling the story of a victim. So please be respectful in the comments, and I hope you come to love Renia Spiegel the way I have, researching her life and reading her diary. Renia was born on the 18th of June in 1924 in Ernikowice, Poland, which is in the Tarnopol province of the southwest Poland, which is in the Ukraine now. By the time her sister Ariana, or Elizabeth, who we shall refer to her as going forward, was born on November 18th, 1930, the family had moved to a town called Stavki, which is by the Dniester River, which is close to the Romanian border. Not much is known about Renia's father, Bernard. What we do know, and what Renia's sister Elizabeth tells us, is that he was a farmer, and he had several employees or farmhands that worked on the farm. She says that it was most likely taken by the Soviet government, considering they were communists. Elizabeth wrote in the afterword of Renia's diary that he wasn't a very involved father. In those days, the father went out, he worked, he brought in the income, while the mother was charged with raising the children and really taking care of them in the house. She also mentions that perhaps he just wasn't as interested in Renia and Elizabeth because they were girls. Maybe he was hoping for boys so they could work on the farm as they got older and help him out. Their mother, Rosa, on the other hand, was an extremely involved mother. She helped them get positions on the radio in Lvov, which is now Lviv, reading poetry in 1935. This opportunity inspired Renia to become extremely devoted to writing her own poetry, and it also led to Elizabeth being discovered as a child actor/singer, where she was eventually dubbed the Polish Shirley Temple. In 1938, Rosa moved herself and Elizabeth to Warsaw to pursue her acting career. But this meant that Renia had to go live with her grandparents, Marcus and Anna Finkel, in Przemsyl, Poland. Przemsyl is located in southern Poland, and it is considered the second oldest city in the southern region, with Krakow being the oldest. This historic city sits on the San River in the Carpathian Mountains near the Ukrainian border. Her grandmother owned a stationery store that was underneath their apartment, while her grandfather was a construction contractor. Renia and Elizabeth, when she moved in later on, they didn't have a room at their grandparents' house. They slept in the corner of the living room near the big wooden desk. And at this desk, Renia would draw up proposals and estimates for her grandfather's business, and she would also write in her diary. In their building, it was on the corner down the street from the synagogue. During this time, Elizabeth was starring in movies and singing on stage and doing work as a child actor, living in Warsaw with her mother, Rosa. In the notes of Renia's diary, Elizabeth writes the following, quote, "I wish I had known how much it broke Renia's heart that Belush and I weren't always with her. If I had, maybe I would remember more. Maybe I would have shown her more how much I loved her." Unquote. Renia started writing in her diary on January 31st, 1939. She states that she started the diary for no specific reason. She just wanted a friend. Since her mother and her sister, whom she loved very much, were far away in Warsaw, she was extremely lonely. She was only 14 years old when she wrote this entry. A 14-year-old who promises to always be honest, to tell her dear diary everything that she worries, dreams, loves, and thinks about. And she reminisces back to her home on the Dniester River, and she writes a poem describing the loneliness and longing for her life before she was separated from her mom and her little sister. Quote, "Again, the need to cry takes over me. When I recall the days that used to be, the linden trees, house, storks, and butterflies, far, somewhere too far for my eyes, I see and hear what I miss, the wind that used to lull old trees, and nobody tells me anymore about the fog, about the silence, the distance and darkness outside the door. I'll always hear this lullaby, see our house and pond laid by, and linden trees against the sky." Unquote. In this first entry, she also goes on to describe the girls in her class, the ones that she likes, dislikes, or doesn't care about at all. Above all, she writes about her best friend Nora, or Norka as she's referred to in the diary, and all of her rivals. Renia goes into great detail about the people in her life. She describes one girl in her class, Belania, or Belka, fat and stocky like 300 devils. She has an exceptional talent for academics and an even more exceptional talent for earning dislike, unquote. There's also a portion of this entry where Renia describes a girl in her class named Ninka. She says that, quote, "This unusual girl who looks completely innocent but receives post-restant letters from various peoples, arranges meetings in dark streets, visits lonely men, and is proud of it," unquote. Then she proceeds with saying, quote, "She's quite nice. There are more girls like her in our class, but as I said before, I either don't care about them or don't want to hang around them because I am a good girl," unquote. Most of Renia's early entries are about the same, just the musings of a young girl who likes to write and go spend time with her friends. There are many parties to go to. She enters and wins many writing contests, and she is constantly fighting and making up with her best friend, Norka. There was a favorite teacher of Renia's, Mrs. Valeria Brzelska-Nibrul, or they called her Brula. She was Renia's Latin teacher. Renia tells her diary that she is the wife of a handsome officer who lives in Lvov. There was great admiration for this specific teacher, so much so they threw a party in Brula's honor where they performed for her. Renia writes often of Brula and her classmates, saying that on May 4th, 1939, she and Brula were on bad terms due to her not examining her in Greek and telling the school headmaster that Renia just wanders around with Norka all day. But mostly she writes about how much she misses her mother and how lonely she is. In the summer of 1939, Elizabeth was sent to live in Przemyśl with Renia and their grandparents, while Rosa stayed behind in Warsaw to promote Elizabeth as a child actress. In August 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression act that had a secret clause that stated in lieu of a German invasion of Poland, the Soviet Union could claim the eastern portion of Poland. This allowed Germany to attack Poland without any interference from the Soviets. September 1st, 1939, the German troops that had been massing on the eastern Polish border invaded the country. This sent the country and Europe into major upheaval and eventually war. Renia writes on September 6th that the previous Thursday, war had broken out. That Thursday was technically August 31st, 1939, but Germany had invaded Poland at dawn on September 1st, 1939. So I guess technically to Renia, it was the middle of the night. And that was a Friday. Later, Elizabeth writes that during the German invasion on September 7th, 1939, Marcus took Renia and Elizabeth out of Przemyśl towards Lvov on foot, fleeing the invasion. Elizabeth recounts that they stepped onto the street and they saw thousands of people fleeing the bombs and German invasion. As they left Przemyśl, they could hear the German planes dropping bombs on the town behind. Their grandfather had figured that possibly if they had stayed away from highly populated areas, they would be all right, because he thought that the Germans would want to attack highly populated areas, so they stuck to rural and forest routes. In one instance, Elizabeth recounts, quote, "We walked out from the wheat, passing the forest as we headed into another field. I looked around and noticed row after row of cabbages, round and ripening and almost ready for the pick. They look like heads," Renia said. "I mean like human heads, not just cabbage heads." Then Grandpa stopped, looked at us and whispered, "Run to the forest, girls, run! We can't be here because the German planes will see the cabbages and think they're people. They'll want to bomb right here." So we shifted directions and ran for our lives through the forest and towards Lvov. On September 10th, Renia pens a poem about their flight to Lvov. "We left the city like fugitives on our own in the dark, dull night. The city bade us farewell with the sound of buildings crashing down. Darkness was above my head. Mercy of good people, mother's embrace in the far distance. Let them be our guidance. Let them give us comfort and assistance. We will walk through all our trials until the day breaks, until it glints. We are lonely fugitives, fugitives deserted by all since." After that entry, Renia doesn't write again until the 18th of September, 1939. On the 17th of September, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded the eastern portion of Poland per the secret clause that was agreed upon with Nazi Germany in the Non-Aggression Act. She states that they have been stuck in Przemyśl for about a week, but the exact date that they returned from Lvov is not known. Renia writes about the city being surrounded and food being in short supply. Renia, Elizabeth, Anna, and Marcus spent many days in the basement of their building listening to bombs falling and bullets whizzing by. On the 22nd of September, she writes that Lvov has surrendered to the Soviets, and she pens this poem. Quote, "The city surrendered. On its borders, a handful continue to fight. Without a command, a handful continue to fight. They won't surrender. They are Lvov's defenders." Renia writes about the shortages of food, clothing, and shoes, and just about anything you need basically in life. Every shop has an extremely long line growing because, quote, "The Russians are especially eager to buy things. They've been organizing raids to get watches, textiles, shoes, etc." Unquote. By October, Renia writes that things have somewhat gone back to normal, but there are some things that are also quite different. Quote, October 28th, 1939. "School life is so strange. Yesterday we had a meeting. The day before, a march. Polish women riot when they hear people saluting Stalin. They refuse to join in. They write secret messages saying, 'Poland has not yet perished,' even though, to be honest, it perished a long time ago. And now there's Western Ukraine here. There's communism. Everybody's equal, and that's what hurts them. It hurts them that they can't say, 'You lousy Yid.' They still say it, but in secret. Those Russians are such handsome boys, though not all of them. One of them was determined to marry me. France and England are fighting with the Germans, and something's brewing here. But what do I care? I just want Mama to come, to be with us. Then I can face my trials and tribulations. One auntie died here, silver-haired, thin, wrinkly old lady. She lived so quietly. She was like a shadow. One gloomy autumn, she just let go. This gray-haired old lady, all wrinkles and wobbles, hunched, shriveled, coughing, always needing goggles. She died, as people do, and away from a calendar a card flew. A new day arrived. Nothing changed in life. This life that she held so dear, the silver-haired lady shed a tear. For her, she was like a shadow, and one gloomy autumn she just let go." Unquote. Starting in November of 1939, Renia was attending a youth club that was made up of local teenagers. Before joining the club, Renia said that she wasn't too preoccupied with boys or really even liked them very much. She even states that she's expected to like a boy or even fall in love. But she feels like a fish out of water, that she can't laugh in a flirtatious way because when she laughs, she means it. As Renia spent more time in this youth club, it seemed that she got a lot more comfortable with herself as she got to know her peers. At her age, falling in love happened very quickly, and falling out of love happened even quicker. The months following October of 1939 pretty much go the same. She is in love with one boy, out of love with that one, and in love with the next one. She's fighting and making up with her friends. She's going to countless parties, and she wins quite a few awards for writing competitions. But it's not until she meets Zygmunt Schwarzer that her life changes. Zygmunt Schwarzer catches her eye and she falls madly in love with him. She refers to him as Zygu or Zygo or Zygush in her diary when she's writing about him. Zygmunt Schwarzer was a boy that was in her school after the Soviet occupation when all of the schools combined. She starts to write about the beginning of this relationship and kind of how she feels about these boys and Zygmunt especially. And she writes, quote, "We see the boys out in town. We're close. We see Maciek almost every day. Only Zygo and Natek are distant. Zygo walked back from school with us today. He looked right at me. He has very powerful eyes, and I went red in the face and didn't say anything. Oh, to hell with such nature. He flirts with Ishka, or perhaps I'm imagining it. Anyway, should he flirt with me? I don't say anything. We are planning to go to a party soon. Will I have fun? Nora more likely than me, since someone is in love with her. I don't believe in anything unless bullshit comes. October 12th, 1940, unquote. There seems to be a lot of uncertainty with Rena and Zygmunt and their relationship and where it's going to go. And she thinks about it a lot, and that's quite evident. But on December 9th, 1940, she writes the following, quote, I love, I desire, I'm crazy for you, Zygu, unquote. And after this, Zygmunt Schwarzer becomes the absolute love of her life. Zygmunt Schwarzer was born in 1923 in Warsaw, Poland. Rosa had gone to school with both of his parents, and his father was a doctor. He was 1 year older than Rena, and he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and become a doctor. Now, Zygmunt had one best friend. His name was Maciek Tuchman, and Maciek is described as, quote, jolly and kind of plump. He always had a crush on my sister. Even though she loved being with him, Rena only had eyes for Zygmunt, unquote. Meanwhile, on December 18th, 1940, Hitler signed Directive 21, which was codenamed Operation Barbarossa. This was the first operational order from the Germans to invade the Soviet Union. One of the main goals of this invasion was to dismantle the quote-unquote Judeo-Bolshevik communist government and its citizens. During the first few months of 1941, the Army High Command, or the Oberkommando des Heeres, OKH, negotiated sending Einsatzgruppen across enemy lines with the help of the Reich Security Main Office, or Reichssicherheitshauptamt, RSHA. The Einsatzgruppen was a special task force, a mobile killing unit. Special units of security police and security service, or Sicherheitsdienst, the SD, that would round up all Jews, communists, or anyone that was deemed the enemy of the state or a threat to the ideals of the Third Reich. They would take them to large pits dug by fellow undesirables or the local militia and systematically shoot and kill every person, then bury them in mass graves. However, the Soviet Union did not expect an invasion from the German army, even as the German troops were massing at the border, just as they did to the Polish border in August of 1939. This led to the Soviet Army and the Soviet Air Force being extremely ill-prepared, which was exactly what the German Army was hoping for. On June 22, 1940, Operation Barbarossa was enacted. The German Army invaded Russia. Over 3 million German troops marched into Russian territory, destroying what was left of the Soviet Air Force that was on the ground. And they encircled millions of Soviet troops, cut them off from supplies, and then forced them to surrender. Because the German army invaded Russia, they forced out the Russian occupiers in the eastern portion of Poland, which then made Poland entirely Nazi occupied. Almost immediately, the Nazis started targeting the Jews of the new occupied territory, issuing sanctions, stealing homes, valuables. However, 2 days before the Germans invaded Russia, on June 20th, 1941, Zygmunt gave Rena her first kiss. She wrote, "Today, yes, today, I knew it. I felt it, that I'll only be able to tell you. We had another wonderful evening, 2 of us alone, properly alone. The sun had set and the stars started to emerge and the moon floated up and we sat next to each other and talked. It was so... When we left, it was dark. We couldn't find the way. We got lost. Yes, we doubly lost. Or rather, only just found ourselves. It was all so sudden and unexpected and sweet and intimidating. I was at a loss for words and terribly mixed up. He said, 'Renushka, give me a kiss.' And before I knew it, it happened. He wanted more later, but I couldn't. I was shaking all over. Z said that he really likes this intentional going astray. He said that we can do this again now or tomorrow. I feel so strange and nice. It was so light and elusive, ethereal, delicate. There was much, much more, but I'm only interested in that one thing, that he has become so close to me, the dearest person in the world, and I'm dizzy all the time. How did it happen? No more now. I need to think and dream. We'll meet tomorrow, Z and I, and you and I, and will tomorrow also be so good and sweet? You will help me, Belush and God." Unquote. On June 26, 1941, Rena wrote the following. Do you remember on 25th of May, I wrote, I had a dream. I dreamed that Mom said she would come on the 25th of June. Good Lord, I didn't know this was what it was going to be. I can't write. I'm weak with fear. War again. War between Russia and Germany. The Germans were here. Then they retreated. Horrible days in the basement. The city has been evacuated. You remember, dear diary, what price I paid for a short moment. Today we stayed too. Grant us, Lord God, the same thing happens now as it did then. I begged you, Lord God, for my dream to come true, and it did. You saved my mother. You gave me him, and the thing I've been wanting for such a long time. And now this war. Give me my mama. Save all of us who have stayed here, and those who escaped the city this morning. Save us. Save Zigu. Today they woke me up. I ran outside and saw his silhouette. Oh, I remember that last Saturday evening well. Holy God Almighty, save us. I want to live so badly. I'm humbling myself before you and begging on behalf of us all, save us. Tonight is going to be terrible. I'm scared. Today was horrible too. I believe that you will hear me, that you won't leave me in this awful hour. You have saved me before. Save me now. Date, I don't even know. Saturday, a week ago? Why? Why speak? Why write? God, thank you for saving me. But my heart is now so heavy, and old thoughts are torn in two. But my heart is held in a leaden fist, and the scary thoughts are new. Now maybe I'll see Belush. I don't know what's going to happen to us. Dido, I believe nothing bad has happened to him. I'm terrified. Almost the whole city is in ruins. A piece of shrapnel fell into our house. These have been horrific days. Why even try to describe them? Words are just words. They can't express what it feels like when your whole soul attaches itself to a whizzing bullet. When your whole will, your whole mind, and all of your senses cling to the flying missiles and beg, not this house. You're selfish, and you forget that the missile that misses you is going to hit someone else. Dear diary, how precious you are to me. How horrible were the moments when I hugged you to my heart. And where is Zigush? I don't know. I believe fervently that no harm has come to him. Where he is, I don't know. Good God, protect him from all evil. Zigush, my only one, because of that farewell of ours, this separation feels all the more bitter. We exchanged photographs and said that we might be separated by the war after all. You are making plans for the future, mine and yours, and I was telling you, I don't know, there might be a war. All of this started 4 hours after the moment you blew me the last kiss up to the balcony. First we heard a shot, then an alarm, and then a howl of destruction and death. I don't know where Irka and Nora are either, where anyone is. That's it for tonight. It's getting dark. God save us all. Dido, Zigu, make it so Mom comes, and let there be no more misery, God. You will help me, Belush and God. Then, on July 1st, 1941, Renia tells her diary that herself and her family and her friends are all alive and doing well. But she also says that the next day, she and all of the Jews in Przemsyl will have to wear a white armband with a blue Star of David. This was the first step the Nazis would take to separate the Jews and dehumanize them. Renia felt such sadness over this change. She wrote, quote, "To you, I will always remain the same Renia, but to others, I will become someone inferior. I will become someone wearing a white armband with a blue star. I will be a Juda." Unquote. From this point, I will be reading from my notes, so I will be looking down periodically, but I will try to look up as much as possible. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the white armband or the Jewish badge is not something new to history. This practice dates back all the way to the 8th century CE, where Muslim rulers used different identifying marks to distinguish practicing Christians and Jews from Muslims. Now, design styles were different with each implementation of the badge, and they were not always used in a bad or punitive way. For instance, Jews in Baghdad during the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid in 807 CE had to wear yellow belts or fringes. In 847 through 61, Caliph Mutawakkil had Jews wearing a patch in the shape of a donkey, while Christians were to wear a patch in the shape of swine. And this happened in Egypt as well in 1005, with Jews wearing bells on their clothing. During the Middle Ages, November 1st, 1215 to be exact, Pope Innocent III gathered an ecumenical council, and this was said to be the largest of its kind. There, it was decreed that Muslims and Jews had to wear distinguishable markings or clothing, and this was later known as Canon 68. And it was a religious decree that separated them from Christians, visually. Then, in 1217, King Henry III ordered all male Jews to wear a badge on the front of their outer garments. In 1275, King Edward I made Jews over the age of 7 wear a badge that was yellow taffeta, 6 fingers long and 3 fingers broad. In England, the badge was in the shape of the tablets of the law or the Ten Commandments, and in 1217, French territories made Jews wear yellow or red circle. German-speaking Europe, their badges were in the shape of a Judenhut or Jew's hat, a conical-shaped headdress which is common in paintings at the time. Then, by 1500, the Judenhut had faded away, and the yellow badge, however, was still popular by the time of the French Revolution, where Europe abandoned the idea. However, after the invasion of Poland in 1939, the Nazis forced a new decree on a town called Włocławek on October 29, 1939. And it wasn't until September 1st, 1941, the 2-year anniversary of the annexation of Poland, that Reinhard Heydrich decreed that all Jews above the age of 6 were to wear a Jewish badge. This was a yellow Star of David on a black background with the word Jew on the inside that was to be worn on the chest. On the 10th of October, 1941, Renia tells her diary that the Nazis have taken their piano away, writing, quote, "So the flat is so empty, it's cold, dark, and lonely." Unquote. It was typical for the Nazis to enter Jewish homes and take what they pleased. Sometimes they would even take the whole house, kicking tenants out or worse, killing them. Renia's sister Elizabeth says about this particular entry concerning the piano, quote, "After 1941, the Nazis began seizing Jewish valuables and household items. If you didn't open the door when they knocked, they forced their way in. Then you were taken away and beaten or put in prison," unquote. And she goes on to describe the day that the piano was taken. Quote, "But the Nazis took whatever they wanted. Your money, your dishes, your clothes, your silverware, your children, or your life. The first thing they stole from us was my grandparents' piano. A few soldiers entered the apartment one afternoon while I was out. They hauled it down the stairs and out the door, leaving a small pile of dust in the space where it had stood. When I came home, Granny was a different person, like her heart had been ripped out." Unquote. Bela Jakubowicz-Tovey, born in Sosnowiec, Poland, describes the confiscation of Jewish valuables after the Nazi invasion of 1939. In a video interview, she recalled, quote, "In the fall of 1939, there was a knock at our door, and there was a German woman and 2 SS were with her, and they came into our apartment, and she walked through the apartment, and she turned to the SS men and said, 'Ich habe es gerne, alles.' She said, 'I like it, all of it.' And they sent in some people a day later. Probably they brought in a truck and they unloaded. They took everything out of our house. I'm talking about our furniture, all our furniture, rugs, whatever she wanted. She was a nice lady. She sent us an old table, some chairs, some old beds, a wardrobe, probably what she had. She must not have been a very well-to-do woman, but you see, she became rich because she was German." Unquote. Even through all of this change and trauma with the German occupation, Renia is still a 17-year-old girl. Renia mostly confides with her diary about her relationship with Sigmund and with her friends. School is no longer allowed for Jewish children, so Renia is stuck at home, only able to write poems in her diary, look out her window, and miss her mother. And she writes a lot about how lonely she is and how much she misses her mother, and most of all, she really wants to go back to school. And she writes this on November 29th, 1941. Quote, "I think it would be great to be in school again. Come back to any previous grade. I can't right now. I can't. All of me is preoccupied with that issue. If all men are selfish tyrants, he is also a selfish tyrant. Because he is, after all, a man. Oh, life, life, stupid life. Like a bird sprung free from a cage, like a colt that was bridled too hard, I would fly away from my nest and jump over fences and start, crossing valley, river, and ditch. I would run free and mad like the wind. Somewhere far where no eye can reach, I would dance in a crazy whirlwind and sway as if in a haze, and thunder down my ways. I would rumble and shake with laughter and freedom and joy, and move from bloom to bloom, flashing like a star, like a blast of dawn, and at night I would fly back to my nest." Unquote. Above all, Rena missed her mother. She needed her there. She was yearning for her presence. I mean, don't we all need our mothers sometimes? My mom lives pretty far away from where I'm at, and sometimes I really wish she was just here. But luckily, I can call her if I really want to talk to her and we have the time. But Rena did not have that luxury. Rena had to rely on packages and letters to arrive from Warsaw to Przemyśl, which wasn't always reliable. But Rena loved and trusted her mother most of all, and she valued her mother's opinion more than anything in the entire world. She even goes as far as to end her diary entries with, "You will help me, Belush and God." As time goes on, more things start to happen. On December 28th, 1941, Rena writes the following. Quote, "Yesterday, coats, furs, collars, oversleeves, hats, boots were taken away on the street. And now there's a new regulation that under the pain of death, it is forbidden to have even a scrap of fur at home." Unquote. Elizabeth tells us that on December 26, 1941, there was a decree that all Jews hand over all fur items for the war effort because German troops needed them. And she goes further to tell us that in some cases, Germans snatched the shoes off of women walking down the street, and they had to walk home in their stockings. The early months of 1942, Rena writes with a lot of anxiety concerning her mother and her relationship with Zygmunt and what will happen in the future with the Nazis in the occupation. Rosa had not sent a letter in a while, and naturally, Rena presumed that Rosa was in the Warsaw Ghetto because that's where Jews were being held in Warsaw at the time. And if she was in the Warsaw Ghetto, she could not send any form of communication. It wasn't until April 1942 that Rena writes about receiving a parcel from her mother, and it brings her great comfort. June 18th, 1942, marked Rena's 18th birthday and her journey into adulthood. She says, "I'm an adult now, but I don't know much. There has been plenty of sadness and worry in my life already, plenty of joy and love too, but I don't know much. I don't even know what I should do now. Right now, I'm feeling good. I'm not so bad, thank goodness." Unquote. But that night, something horrible happens, and Rena can hear the hell unfolding just outside of her front door. This is another section where I will be looking down at my notes quite a bit. Hopefully, it won't be as noticeable. Summer of 1942, there were rumors of anti-Jewish riots in different towns, Tarnów and Rzeszów, that were in between Przemyśl and Kraków. Przemyśl Juien investigated these rumors, and they ultimately ended up being true. Not wanting riots to happen in Przemyśl, the Judenrat went to the Gestapo and asked them for protection. The Judenrat was a board which was appointed by the Gestapo, and they were a board of elders. And what they did was they were the voice of the Jewish community within the ghetto, and they distributed food, they compiled lists of residents within the ghetto, and among other things. Basically, they were just the voices for the entire Jewish population of the ghetto. When the Judenrat asked the Gestapo for protection, the Gestapo acted as if they were considering it and ultimately responded with the following plan. The Judenrat would need to follow directions and provide the Gestapo with 1,000 Jewish men, and they would be sent to forced labor at Janowska concentration camp in Lvov. This camp was initially used for forced labor. Prisoners were forced to do carpentry and metal work, but it was later used to further enact the final solution. They forced these young men onto cattle cars while their family members watched and waved goodbye to their sons and brothers. Even worse, the Gestapo shot the family members as they bid farewell to them right there on the tracks. Later, They even charged the surviving family members with the cost of their sons' and brothers' transport to Janowska. Evil has no limits when it is allowed to flourish like the plague. July 5th, 1942. Notices were posted for all Jewish families to move into the Przemsyl ghetto. Renia details in her diary that this is something she and her family had feared the most. Even more, deportation. 10 days later, all Jews from Przemsyl were shut into the ghetto, surrounded by barbed wire and guards. According to the Holocaust Research Project's website about the Przemsyl ghetto, on July 20th, 1942, the German authorities demanded a payment of 1,300,000 zloty from the Judenrat. This meant that every single family within the ghetto limits had to pay dues to the Jewish police when they came to collect. This payment was demanded in the guise of peacekeeping. If they paid, the Germans would leave them alone. However, that same day, the Germans had already planned an action, or a mass roundup, on the ghetto's inhabitants to happen on July 27, 1942. Frantically, on the 24th of July, Renia writes in her diary, "Dear God, help us. We need to pay our contribution by 12 o'clock tomorrow. The city is in danger, but I still have faith. My faith is deep, and I beg you, you will help us, Belush and God." The day before this entry, the Judenrat was told by the Gestapo that on the 27th of July, there would be an action. They would round up Jews for forced labor while others would be given work permits. In all, only 5,000 permits were given to the Judenrat, while 22,000 to 24,000 Jews were currently living inside the ghetto walls. Renia's next two entries would be her last. July 25th, 1942. The following day in the morning. Ordners came last night. Dido hasn't paid everything yet. Not enough money. Oh, why can't money rain from the sky? It's people's lives after all. Terrible times have come. Mama, you have no idea how terrible. But Lord God looks after us, and though I'm horribly frightened, I have faith in him. I trust because this morning a bright ray of sunshine came through all of this darkness. It was sent by Mama in a letter in the form of a wonderful photograph of her. And when she smiled at me from the photo, I thought that Holy God has us in his care. Even in the darkest moments, there is something that can make me smile. You will help me, Belush and God. In the evening. My dear diary, my good beloved friend, we went through such terrible times together, and now the worst moment is upon us. I could be afraid now, but the one who didn't leave us then will help us today too. He'll save us. Here, O Israel, save us, help us. You've kept me safe from bullets and bombs, from grenades. Help me survive, help us. And you, my dear Mama, pray for us today, pray hard. Think about us, and may your thoughts be blessed. Mama, my dearest one and only, such terrible times are coming. I love you with all of my heart. I love you. We'll be together again. God protect us all, and Zygmunt and grandparents and Yaroshka. God, into your hands I commit myself. You will help me, Belush and God. After this last entry, Renia has to go into hiding. Zygmunt smuggled her and his parents out of the ghetto and into the tenement house attic of 10 Moniuszki Street. Zygmunt's uncle, Samuel Gallagher, lived there, and he was a member of the Jewish Judenrat. They were able to hide there for a few days while Zygmunt worked tirelessly to secure work permits for the three of them. He writes about the next few days in Renia's diary, detailing that he has to save the three people he loves the most. Just before all of this, Zygmunt successfully smuggles Renia's little sister, Elizabeth, out of the ghetto into the safety of her childhood best friend's house, Jidka Leszczynski. Mr. and Mrs. Leszczynski hid Elizabeth in their home for several days before she found out what happened to her older sister. On July 30th, 1942, someone reported that 3 Jews were hiding in the attic at 10 Moniuszki Street. At 10:30 p.m., the Gestapo stormed in and dragged out 3 people, Renia Spiegel, Dr. Wilhelm Schwarzer, and Sophie Gallagher. They were taken out onto the street and shot. The last entry of Renia's diary, mournfully written by her most beloved Zygmunt Schwarzer, reads as follows. Quote, July 31st, 1942. 3 shots, 3 lives lost. It happened last night at 10:30 p.m. Fate decided to take my dearest ones away from me. My life is over. All I can hear are shots, shots, shots. My dearest Renusha, the last chapter of your diary is complete." Unquote. We are going through another section where I will be reading through my notes. There were 3 different actions that occurred within the Przemyśl ghetto. The first being on July 27, 1942, where 6,500 Jews were liquidated and sent to Belzec death camp. 2,500 elderly, infirm, or sick Jews were taken to the Grochowsche forest. They were made to stand at the edge of a pit, shot in the nape of the neck, and buried in a number of mass graves. Elizabeth speculates that this is the fate that her grandparents, Marcus Finkel and Anna Finkel, suffered, though there is no official documentation. August 3rd, 1942, marked the third action where another 3,000 Jews were sent to Belzec death camp. There were further actions which occurred in the Przemyśl ghetto from 1942 to 1944 until the Russians took over the city. According to JewishGen.org, in 1931, Przemyśl's Jews made up 34% of the population. After the establishment of the Przemyśl ghetto, some 24,000 Jews occupied the small enclosed area. By Przemyśl's Russian liberation in 1944, only 300 Przemyśl Jews were still alive. Elizabeth had been hiding at the Leszczynskis for about a week when Mr. Leszczynski took Elizabeth to the train station to Krakow and then to Warsaw. In Warsaw, as Mr. Leszczynski and Elizabeth stepped off the train onto the platform, they were approached by a man who raised his hand and yelled at Mr. Leszczynski, "You came here with a Jewish girl? I'm turning you in." Mr. Leszczynski pulled Elizabeth close to him, towering over this man, yelling, "Get the hell away from me. If you don't, I will kill you right here." This caused the man to stop and stare for a few seconds before he ran away, and they never saw him again. After this encounter, Elizabeth was taken to her mother, who had been staying with her friends, the Buredas. With their help, Rosa had a new identity in Warsaw as a Polish Catholic woman and was working at the Hotel Europejski as an assistant director. The Buredas also happened to secure a baptismal certificate and new identity papers for Elizabeth, who was now known as Elżbieta Leszczyńska, a Polish Catholic. After this point, Elizabeth and Rosa would completely convert to Catholicism. They were also permitted to live at the hotel after an incident on a trolley home from church. The trolley was stopped by a Nazi soldier holding a gun. He ordered everybody off, and German speakers to one side and non-German speakers to another side. Now, Rosa was fluent in German, and she spoke like a native because she was very well educated. So she took Elizabeth by the hand and bent down and was speaking to her in German, and the Nazi soldier with the gun let her go. Those who couldn't speak German were sent to forced labor. The locals called this a lapanka, which obviously Rosa was quite familiar with living in Warsaw this entire time. So they were able to get away from that. So after that experience, they were permitted to live at the hotel, so they no longer had to commute. In December 1946, Elizabeth and Rosa emigrated to the United States. They ended up in New Rochelle, where they were sponsored by Marcus's cousin's son, Dr. William Dubilier. I hope I'm saying that right. They moved around New York and Connecticut. Elizabeth enrolled at college, first in Manhattan, and then Missouri, and again at Columbia University, where she would become a teacher. In 1950, one day Elizabeth was visiting her mother when they were paid a surprise visit. Zygmunt Schwarzer was at the door. Zygmunt had survived the Przemyśl ghetto, Auschwitz, then Sachsenhausen, and then to a camp in Landsberg, Bavaria. He was liberated on April 30th, 1945, where he met his wife Gina and studied medicine at Heidelberg University, where he graduated in 1949. In 1964, Elizabeth went to a party where she met a man, George Belloc, who was a Vienna-born teacher from Newton. They would eventually marry that June at City Hall, and within a few months of their wedding, Elizabeth was pregnant with their oldest son, Andrew. In 1970, George and Elizabeth also had a daughter named Alexandra. On November 23rd, 1969, after a lengthy battle with cancer, Rosa would sadly pass away. This is when Elizabeth came into possession with Rena's diary, and she would place it in safekeeping in a safety deposit box at Chase National Bank. The diary would sit in that safety deposit box for almost 40 years. This is also when Elizabeth decided to leave her Jewish past behind her and live her life as a Catholic Polish woman. It wasn't until her daughter Alexandra, who was 12 at the time, started making derogatory remarks about Jews that Elizabeth decided it was time to tell her children who she was and where she came from. In 2012, Alexandra would send 20 pages at a time to a Polish student for translation. It took 4 more years for her diary to be published. It was first published in Polish, but Poland didn't take much consideration to the book because the subject of Polish Jews during the Holocaust was not a subject still widely talked about. There was even a poetry contest started in Rena's name. Tomasz Magierski, a filmmaker, even wrote a play about Rena after receiving a copy of Rena's diary from Elizabeth. The play was performed in Przemyśl, and it brought Rena's story and the story of all Przemyśl Jews to light to the population and even the younger generation. Renia Spiegel was lost on July 30th, 1942, but her story lives on through her diary and her memories Elizabeth has shared with the world. Renia Spiegel was a beautiful poet. She loved deeply, but most of all, she was just like you and me. It was an honor to get to know her through her diary and her poems. In loving memory of Renia Spiegel, Marcus Finkel, Anna Finkel, Dr. Wilhelm Schwarzer, and Sophie Goliger, and the countless Jews of Przemyśl, Poland that were lost between the years of 1939 and 1944. Thank you for joining me today in the first ever episode of Tell My Story. I hope you enjoyed getting to know Renia Spiegel, and I hope to see you in the next one.